student. Sure, got it. Camille was a recent doctoral student as well, and there was some learning lab, like undergraduates team that were helping us to do this research too. So today I'm gonna just show you one, not in detail, but we have an educator's practice guides, and also I'm gonna talk about mainly about two assessment tools. One is the face-to-face paper-based assessment we did in fall 2019, and then we converted to an online assessment with kindergartners as well. Fall 2020, we have a data on that one, so we're going to show about that. So they already developed this patterning tips tool, but we are updating this also. This is going to be a short guide for us to disseminate our results, and also form a basis for future research and refinement of a practice guide about on patterning skills. So we call our assessment as Early Patterning Assessment, EPA. So you can access through Bethany or through me if anyone of interested in using that one. The goal was to develop a valid and reliable measure for 4 to 6 year olds, preschoolers and kindergartners, children's repeating and growing patterning knowledge that is faster and easier to administer than existing measures. A further goal that we also with this online assessment tool is to reach beyond just the boundaries. So that's another goal we have, and the further goal is to have an assessment tool that could be run by itself and then measure and then collect data without needing researcher. But for now, so we have the researchers. Within this development, so there was a textbook analysis. I'll show short about the textbook analysis, not in details, and the design of the measure, and our pilot studies with the kindergartner in fall 2019. And then we revised the measure and we converted to an online measure. And we piloted to 4 to 6 years old children in fall 2020. They reviewed, they started to review before me, but they continued to reviewing the kindergarten math textbooks from several major publications for focusing on the activities on repeating and growing patterns. After 2012, when Common Core was adopted, almost no patterning activities included in Envision Math or Go Math. So that's interesting. So even though there is an emphasis on patterning activities, but it's removed. I mean, with the recent Common Core also, you might not see the patterning within the Common Core, but still it's and used in classroom and practice. And there's a whole report on the project webpage for this analysis. With the textbooks analysis, so this is going to be the last slide for the textbook analysis. The patterning type and the units that we found that just the pattern units primarily was on AB or ABB, like blue, red, red, kind of information in here. AAB patterns and ABC patterns. For the growing patterns, almost all of them are adding 1. So just like now, they're 1 by 1 addition. But we also embedded in add 2 in our tool to see the difficulties for that. We also look for the task type that was in the textbook. The extend item was the most common across the pattern types, especially for the growing patterns. So I'm going to show you examples of what we mean with the extend items. Other types of repeating pattern tags that we found, which is not as common as the extend items, identifying the pattern units, abstracting pattern, creating a new pattern, or selecting or finding missing item or pattern completion. But these words, the other ones, was very rare in the textbooks. The EPA repeating pattern subscale included in fall 2019, we had 5 task types with 4 items in each of them. So totally we had 20 items. 5 tasks. I'm gonna show you examples in the next, starting with the next slide. Completion, extension, abstraction, identifying pattern units. And then we also added just pattern identification, calling that, is this a pattern? And we have the types of pattern, as you see, AB, AAB, and it goes on like this. And some of them were not very common in the textbook, like the ones that here, AABs, AABC, or even ABCD. So we were also looking for the difficulties. I'm going to show you right maps of our findings for that one. In Fall 2020, we built on Fall 2019 task, but in this time, we just removed one of the tasks, identifying pattern units. We dropped that one because it was difficult to embed with the online assessment. The student was in face-to-face, was circling the physical paper, and then we were recording that. So it was difficult with our Zoom meeting to record that. There are like ways to do that, so we are going to investigate. But for the Fall 20, that right after the pandemic started, so we removed that task. So we had totally 16 items in that one. So these are different types of items, like pattern identification, asking students, is this a pattern? So this is an identification of non-pattern. So we're giving something that's not a pattern. So we're trying to force students to define what is not a pattern, or is this a pattern? I'll also show you the online tool that we've been using. This is a completion item. So we have a pattern, and then we are giving a multiple choice item student choosing which one that fills that. In physical face-to-face assessment, so we have 2 A4 papers. One of them is showing the pattern, the other one including the answers. So the question and the answers was pretty apart from each other, and we were using Velcro bands. The student was physically moving and just like one of the answers, and then sticking on within the answers or within the questions over there. This is the physical one. We also extend like a missing one. We're asking what comes next type of question. There's a pattern, and then the student again needs to choose one of the patterns that was from here and then paste it in the face-to-face items. The other one is, so this is one of the difficult items, abstracting pattern. So we are giving students some type of a pattern with some objects, and then we're asking them to create the same type of a pattern, but with the different objects. Like this one is like AAB. The student needs to find out this is an AAB pattern, and they need to find out this is just like AAB pattern. We also don't want student to match, like matching kind of the butterfly is here, and then the square is in here, then we the butterfly. So within the physical one, there was a discrepancy between from the questions and then answers. In the online, we just made this one smaller. That makes it difficult to match because we don't want to measure the matching skills. We want them to abstracting skills. That was one trick that we did in online tool. When I show it, maybe it's going to be more apparent. So in Fall 2009, we had 3 task types, 4 items per 4 or 5 item types. We had total of 14 items, 3 tasks. Again, for the growing pattern, I'm going to show you the examples: the completion, extension, and identifying pattern units. 4 growing pattern units: increasing versus decreasing, and change of 1 or 2. Like the books was the add 1, so we added add 1, subtract 1, add 2, subtract. So that's what I mean here. Patterns created with objects versus numerals. So we were comparing the patterns, the answers with if the student's answers change with if the pattern is created with the objects versus numerals. In Fall 2020, we had 4 task types and total of 18 items. Added the pattern identification items. We piloted them before, and then pattern unit identification decreased to 2 items because it was so difficult in 2019. That was the revision that we have done. Afterwards, dropped items from analysis to poor item fits, identification of best pattern identification items, and combined scoring of identification items. So these are some examples of growing items. These are add 1 object items. These are subtract 2 numeral items. This is an identification non-pattern, so the student needs to find out if this is a pattern or not. So these are some examples. Another type of example for the growing. So we are finding the missing part for the growing subscales, and or the completion for the numeral was here, the number is missing for if you want them to find the numbers. The same type, extending here, the student needs to extend the numeral, the student needs to extend the object, that's the same type of items. Or identifying pattern units, so we want them just like each time they're moving to here, each time they're adding numeral for here, they need to find what's the pattern in here, they need to find out the pattern units in this case. For 2019, so I'm going to show you two methods, one for 2019, one for 2020. For 2019, that was an in-person. We have 5 to 7 years old attending a local private school. First term of kindergarten, here kindergarten students, we had 47 children. The average years was 5.90 years and standard deviations was 0.40. We had 53 of them as just like females, and it was a white dominant school. So it was the SESs was medium or high. There's like 66% of the students didn't get any financial assistance to attend the school, and 98% of the students English only at home, and no early intervention for these 81% of the students. Repeating and growing patterning knowledge was assessed. Counterbalance order of subscales administration was being maintained, and we were planning just like to present this result in SRCD to 2021. In Fall 22, we updated this assessment with changing to an online. We did the assessment through an open lab, and we used Zoom for synchronous session, assessing for preschool and kindergarten students to examine its across full target age range for assessment. So let me show you quickly the tool. Stop sharing this one. You share. Oh, interesting. Basic. Let's say, where is it? I guess it's here. Let's see. Speed test. Let's go to speed test. Here's that. So whenever you enter this one, it goes to the full screen. And I'm just like doing the same thing here in Turkey. So this is going to be some Turkish, but it's not mainly like the Turkish. But we're gonna apply similar ideas to here with the kindergarten students. We're almost ready to start the data collection. So we have a tool to just like a snail here. We want them just like a progress bar here, so to know like how much that they go. We want them to the snail to meet with their friends. So that's just kind of thing. These are the screen that for the 2020 students. We are just like some demo questions that we want them to familiarize with the type of questions. So we're asking, is this a pattern kind of question? And then we have a practice question, students just answering the questions by clicking. By the way, we are giving the control to students. The students are opening this web page with their parents, and then they use the mouse if they're familiar using with the mouse, or the parent is helping whatever the student says. So, but most of the time, the students were using the mouse to clicking that one. The first practice question that they answer the question, and whenever we have two steps, so they choose an answer, and for the purpose if they click unintentionally without just like not being very practical using the mouse, so we gave another chance confirming the answer. With the practice questions, we have an arrow here, we stop and then we give feedback to students for the practice question, but not all of them. Then for all questions, student click, and then just like a second click to answer, and then next questions comes. So I'm just going to skip. This is just missing type of question. Oh, let me pull this one. What comes next type of question, the student selects and then confirm it. This is an abstract. So look at this one. It's the size will change. Like that's what I mean. So we don't have physical difference, physical separation between the question and the answer, not too much. So that's the reason we did minimizing the question. So it's make it difficult to choose which one that just like student have. So, and then they are selecting the answer and I'm going. And is this a pattern kind of question? I'm just skipping some questions, showing the different types of questions. And this goes like this. The student just clicks and find out each type of questions. So I'm going to stop sharing for this one. So that's how the tool goes with share. This was our tool. We have students from 4 to 6 years old. From fall 2020, we had 96 children. On the average years 5.1 years old. Again, 51% was girls. White dominance is here too, 88%. But this is not, this time it's not coming from only from Nashville, even though we just disseminate to the Nashville schools. But they shared with that in their Facebook pages, in their social media accounts. So there are attendees coming from different states were just like happening in this one. So that's just like when we have, even though it's a white dominant sample that we have, but this time we are having just coming from many different parts of United States, the participants. The result from the fall 2019 descriptive statistic for the kindergarten children only. So we want to compare the kindergartners from 2019 with the 2020. That's the reason we're focusing on the 2019 kindergartner students. These are the mean scores and then Chromebox alphas for the paper-based test. So that was producing valid and reliable results based on just like our analysis. Children's repeating and growing pattern knowledge were positively correlated. That was one thing that we found out. It's not a very strong correlation, but it's just like 0.4. It's a like medium kind of like correlation that we have. Children were significantly better at repeating than the growing pattern tasks. So that was easier for them to completing the repeating patterns. Notably, accuracy was higher among children who completed the repeating patterns first than among children who completed the growing first. So in the 2019, we had two types of assessment. So we had repeating and growing patterns. So we crossed the application. The first is repeating and then the growing. And then for some of the random assignment, the growing first and then repeating first. So that was why we are doing this analysis here. So this is a Wright map. The Wright map shows us the difficulties of items. So that was one thing that we have different types of questions. And then we were trying to find out the difficulty levels of the items. So the easiest items are on top. And here is the color codes for the repeating and growing patterns. Identifying the rules as one of the difficult items types, as you see like the blues and here. And the completion and extension items was among the easier ones that you see. Identification of patterns. The question is this a pattern? Items looks like easier. And completion by extending to, as you see, it's difficult than completion extending by one. That was our guess, that was our hypothesis. So that's from the 2019 writing map that we have. So in general, we can say that for the missing and ID patterns were difficult than the extended. Extended was difficult than abstract, and then unit identification. So the most difficult was the unit identification. For the missing one, is again the unit identification is the most difficult one. Then abstract, then missing or extend items from the Wright map that we have. For the repeating patterns, again, 2019, the easiest task was identifying repeating pattern. Is this a pattern type of questions? Completion extended item didn't differ substantial. That was similar within that one. Abstract items were harder, but not a lot harder than compared to the other ones. Pattern units with 3 and 4 unique elements. These are A, B, C, D. It's just like, no, A, B, C or AAB. 3 and 4 unique elements had similar IRT difficulty estimates for the 2019 data. For the growing patterns, the most difficult items was identifying the pattern unit. So that was our hypothesis too, and that just like, supported with the data we have. Similar performance on items with objects versus numerals. So like it doesn't differ if you show an object and if you create the pattern with the numerals. Growing patterns with a change by 2 pattern rule were more difficult than ones with a change by 1 rule for missing and extended items. That was also our hypothesis that we're doing. We did this similar analysis for the 2020 data. For the repeating pattern, we had a high reliability, and overall reliability was higher for 2020 data, but the growing pattern wasn't high enough that we could think that we could use. So we couldn't use we are not using the growing online tool before updating. So, but if we plan to use that, not as a subscale, but as a part of a total like patterning assessment, we still can use the growing patterns, but by itself as a subscale, we don't want to use it for now. So we're just gonna like, it needs a revision. So we're gonna just like do some revision on that one. Children's repeating and growing patterning ability estimates were positively correlated, like the face-to-face one on paper-based ones. Children's repeating and growing pattern ability estimates were somewhat positively correlated after controlling for age. So that's what we've done. It's not a strong correlation again. Children were significantly better at completing repeating than growing pattern tasks. This was similar to the 2019 data as well. This is a Wright map for 2020 data. As we see that again, the completion and extend items, like the easier items, identifying unit items is the most difficult items that we have. The other one is kind of just like mixed in here, the completion extend by 2, and still completion and extended by 1 is easier than extend by 2. And here, some results from the Wright map from this one. The easiest task is completion among the repeating items. The completion items are easier than the extend, unlike in 2019. So in 2019 data, completion and extend was similar. It has the similar difficulties that was mix and match with each other. But in online version, completion was basically easier than the extend items. And it's in line with the Clemens and Strama. By the way, Douglas Clement was on advisory board for this project, so he has a lot of suggestions for us to update with the tools too. Extending and abstracting repeating patterns, similar difficulty, again, unlike 2019, where extend items were easier than abstract items. So there are some differences that we found out with the 2019 and 2020 data, but the trends were similar to 2019 for the growing patterns. Most difficult items were pattern unit identification. Growing patterns with a change by 2 pattern rule were more difficult than ones with a change by 1 rule for completion and extend items. No clear distinction that objects items were easier than numeral items. That was again the case for the 2019 data. This is a kind of comparison for the in-person and online participating in kindergarten. So just the descriptives, number of participants that we have, the age, segregation for 2 data sets that we can see in here. This is a comparison for kindergarten accuracy for repeating pattern items. The accuracy for pattern identification was a bit higher if you compare it to the online version, but the completion was higher compared to the in-person. Extent was higher in person, and abstract was higher on online person for the accuracy. And in parentheses, we have the standard deviations for this one. For the growing patterns, that's closer if you compare it to just like, the completions for the growing patterns. As again, for the growing pattern, so the reliability is lower. So we need to be cautious about just like, talking about only the growing part, but we want to show you the comparison like the repeating. So it's here, but this result should be cautiously looked. Again, the completions were very similar for both in person and online. The extent was higher in person, and identifying pattern units was again higher in person. So there is a serious revision is needed for the online growing pattern items. So we're working on that one. Overall, for the new assessments, EPA, early patterning assessments, repeating measure is reliable across ages, and formats can be used and shared. Growing pattern subscales need future revision and development, although it's okay to include if you don't use the subscales, because the total correlation was enough to use, but not individually. No clear and systematic differences in assessment difficulty with adoption to online version. So even though there are some differences, but the online adoption was okay to go. Repeating patterns subscale performance across 2019 and 2020, identification and completion items appear to be easiest, followed by the extend items, followed by the abstract items. That's also a hypothesis that we have. For the growing pattern, completion and extension are similar performance and easier than identifying pattern units item. New pattern identification items need further refinements. I mean, that's the whole growing pattern needs just like some ideas to revise that one too. So I have some additional slides, but I'm just gonna keep them. If there's questions that I'll show that, but I'm just gonna stop right here. Guess it's much shorter than I thought. I guess I talked too much, but I mean, we can have more questions, maybe more question time to discuss if you have further questions. And if you want to see the tool, I can show you again.
Okay, I think that's a good way forward, Serkan. Thank you for this talk, sharing your work with us. So we can have a lot of time for interaction, questions, comments now. And as you suggested, we can go back and revisit some of the key points from the tool or your talk. Okay, so the floor is open now for contributions from the crowd. Well, it's not as big a crowd as I thought would be, but still a very engaging crowd. Let's see where we go from here. I see Gülseren's hand up, so maybe we can start with Gülseren's comments.
Thank you, Serkan. This was stimulating, actually. Thank you so much, Tol. Yeah. I have a few questions, but I will just, wait for my time. I'm going to start with the first one. If I missed, just, correct me. But I would like to know if there was any learning before these kids took the test, even if you had the team, taught them, or even if they had some education in the schools, doesn't matter. If there was any learning on the part of the students, how did you cope with the idea of assessing teaching the to the test versus if they have learned the ideas, similar ideas. Like, how did you cope with that? Like, with the idea of teaching to the test versus like, this is what they really have. This is how they really understand. Yeah.
That's a good question. There was no intervention in this part of the project, but there used to be a part with the intervention study. So there was a teaching, but not in this one. This one is for mainly to having an assessment tool as the students go. So we are trying to develop an assessment tool to measure the student patterning skills. So that the student, there is no teaching in schools, either on our side or on teacher side, that they're just using the regular curriculum.
Thank you. Okay, this helps. Yeah.
Thank you.
Though I wish you had some, interaction or whatever, like your team, so that I could ask you, like, how did you cope with it? But so you didn't have to cope with it. So
Yes.
yeah.
I mean, so there would be some intervention later again after we refine the tool. But for this part of the project, it's just to develop an assessment tool that we could assess students, the growing and repeating pattern skills. So that's the ultimate aim for this part of the project. But there are other studies that Bethany was doing with the intervention studies, and then I'm planning to do some intervention studies here in Turkey too. But after we just revise, at least we have a growing patterning skill, so it has a good reliability, and then we can just use that. Let's use this tool to measure the effectiveness of our intervention. But for now, so we need to revise a little bit the tool itself.
Thank you.
Yeah, even the tool could be used maybe as a source of intervention as well. That might be one other avenue forward, something to consider maybe. I have a quick question. I don't see any hands at the moment. Hands up. I wonder, Serkan, if there's any thing related with the background processing among the kids. Like you mentioned that it's you're favoring certain kinds of approaches, matching and abstracting were two things you mentioned, and you favored abstracting rather than matching. I think in the part you showed us, there's nothing you can really infer as to how they reach answers, the kids. But is there any work towards this within the scope of the bigger project, or do you think it's important to go beyond simply capturing the answers, but also looking at how the answers are produced?
Yes, I mean, we had the video recordings for even in person, and also we have the video recordings for the online version too. And I started watching some of them for the face-to-face one. And so that part of a brief vision for a couple of videos from the students. So it tells some other things that we can look in detail. How student answered, how much time the student just spends, what kind of reaction with the researcher or the teacher was done, and then student answered. So there are things that we could look further just beyond getting the answer, but we haven't gone that part. So, but we discussed, we thought that might be interesting. For example, the pattern identification unit, especially for the growing patterns, adding by 2 or just removing by 2 kind of thing. Most of the students answer incorrectly, but it's not because the part that I watched, it's not because for some students, it's not because they don't know, because they don't know how to answer the question. They repeat it just 10, 8, for example, 6, they count it. But they don't say it's a change by 2. and we don't force them. We don't just like, poke them to give that answer, because if we do that, so that also affects the answers. But there are parts that we are not so sure if that specific question is measuring their knowledge, or because they don't understand how to answer kind of things. Maybe that parts also affect the growing results that's not reliable for now. Because in person, we have more information with face-to-face with students. So that's what we need to look further, and that we discussed, but we said, I mean, let's take our notes and then let's discuss more about this. So that's a nice point. And then we discussed a little bit, but that's an important point.
Actually, what triggered this question was you mentioned that this line of thought kind of influenced to some extent some decisions you made about designing the task. Like you decided to make certain things smaller. I was also thinking, what would happen if you didn't make them small and some students, some kids could actually do matching and produce the desired answer. I wondered to what extent you wanted to direct them toward or stop them from matching and wanted them to engage in abstracting. So I wondered what other considerations you made, design considerations towards that.
That decision comes from the literature, and because the matching the patterns and finding out the result is a separate skill, and abstraction, like seeing a pattern and finding out the units and then recreating a pattern, is a different skill. So we wanted to separate these two skills. That's the reason we are trying to find ways to implement that. One way of implementing in 2019 face-to-face one, in-person one, which was Doug Clements was suggesting separating the question and the answers like apart from each other, that just like physical differences, like space between the question and answer makes them student. These are two separate pages, so it's difficult to match them. But in screen, we have very limited space, and think about it just like a Mac screen is a 13-inch screen, for example. They are so close to each other, so it makes it so easier to match them. And we thought, like, what can we do with the online part? Just like making similar to the idea for the in-person paper-based one. And then we found that if you make it small, then it's just like it's difficult to match because they're not aligned with that one. And we read the literature, and also we just like asked Doug about it, and he said just like no. And also Marta Alibali was also just like an advisor. So we asked Marta Alibali too, and they were also supported the just like shrinking idea to eliminate the matching skill.
Okay, let's see whether there are any other contributions, questions.
Meleken Muslat is here, and Meleken Muslat is on my team for the Turkish implementation. We've been working for more than 6 months, and we developed the tool in Turkish, and we just like developed everything. We got our IRBs, and we're ready to just collect the data. So we're gonna like soon collect the data in Turkish students, and again online one, and just repeating pattern. And we're implementing some other tools like for some executive functioning tools to compare with the Turkish students. So thanks Melek and Muslat, just like two of the team is here, and their help was incredible for the last 8 months that developing the Turkish one. I guess Gülseren has
Serkan has another question. Yeah. Go.
Thank you. Actually, you asked one of my questions, Engin, and Serkan, kind of answered them, right? My one suggestion, maybe for abstracting creating, I thought when you were speaking that although these items are multiple choice items, seems like, right? So maybe open-ended for the creation maybe open-ended or abstracting open-ended questions, like can you make a similar or whatever, like can you just grow the pattern, or maybe just like extend the pattern, or like whatever your questions or like types will be, asking them to create on their own, but still it will be, of course, open-ended on their part. Yeah.
That was that question before I just joined the team. They made student in-person study. They made students to create patterns using the interacting cubes, like interconnecting cubes, that connecting cubes. I don't remember on top of my head why did they take that question out. But there was a question using the manipulatives to create. I guess it was difficult to make a paper-based test. That was one reason, but I'm not sure if there's another reason for the takeout. But that was maybe we can reconsider with the online tool. But I need to just rethink again. But thanks for emphasizing that. That was a good point.
Thank you. And the last question I had, actually, when you were speaking, it was about 2012 Common Core idea giving up on the pattern recognition by kindergartners, and still the team wanted to, if two questions, still the team wanted to just pursue that their research, and what was the motive behind it? Although, Common Core says, I'm not going to, emphasize it, but then has any, since 9 years, right? Almost, yeah. Has there been any change in their, in Common Core's ideas towards should we change this? Maybe, maybe your research has triggered something on their part to rethink about.
The research triggered for them to add them to the Common Core, so that was part of it. So I'm not sure why did they, so we don't know why they just removed from the Common Core, but we still think that that's an important skill, and we know that they're still being used in practice, even if it's not Common Core. And then we think that we don't know who, but there is an emphasis on that. There's a person or a group of people that emphasize that decision. And then we think that might be just a temporary decision. So that comes back. And we still think that's important. So that's the reason we're still keeping on that one. But that's a sign that to watch how thing goes and how the research builds on top of that. And then we might say, okay, we are going to just seize this skill down, but we still think that that's still important, and it's going to come back to the Common Core. So we're watching that.
All right, you first step. send your reports to them.
Yeah, we will.
Yes, yeah, there we go.
Julian Sarama, Douglas Clemens, still think that's important. I know that that they are the good, very important influencer, the Common Cores and the math in the United States. Still, we got Martha Alibali on the other hand. They still just the things that it's important, and that's going to come back. So we just discussed this with many researchers, and that's why we're kind of on standby, not seizing it down, but keeping going on.
Thank you, Zach.
Okay.
So to keep the pattern going, I need to ask another question now. So we have an AB, but I don't have a question at the moment.
You are on my side of screen, and you said it's on my side of screen. And I'm in the middle.
Yeah.
I'm looking out to see whether there are any other
I didn't look at the chat, but there are two things in chat. I'm not sure. Oh, okay.
There's a thank you comment, and Musrat was writing about her being in the team. And it's nice you have a nice team working nicely.
So I can talk a bit about the development part of this online tool. So that's opened a new space for us to do research. With March 2019, when the school closed down, And I said, let's go on doing this one with online. And they were skeptical at the first, but we started developing this one online, and then we started with Zooming with kids, and most of the kids did very well with the mouse. I mean, almost no parents needed to help two kids to play during the time with this online assessment. But the online assessment environment was a nice part too. So if let me show that one to you too. So that's, if anyone would like to use that kind of thing, that environment, there are other alternatives to this environment. But let me share this one. Okay. Let me say Open Online, Open Lab Online. So we use two environments. This one, Open Lab Online, it's a free environment that you could just like have an account and then you can use it, and you can create different tasks. And but for this is for disseminate and collecting data using this tool. So it's on the background, it just like collects all the data that we have in here. So you get individual data or like the whole data in here, you can download it. We have different tasks, but within this task, there is the second web page that we use. It's called Lab.js, which is the developing environment. So that's where we develop this tool. So this is an environment to disseminate your research, and then just like to collect the data. But this one is to build tool. And I use a lot of codes to create the tool that we have. Like these are codes that I have written on the background for each items, like that showing, because I want it to be dynamic. But if you want to use, and this is like a PowerPoint thing, you are putting everything online, in line in here, and then it just calls these codes, and then you can just like, do it. But it doesn't have to be all codes. Let me show you one thing. This one, another one, I guess. This is yürütücü işlevler becerisi, executive functioning skills. Screen. Let's go. Excuse me.
No, you're sorry. Like when you're.
I'm listening.
Also, since you are doing the Turkish version of this also here, since you are doing the Turkish version of this here also, maybe you can also talk with like Milli Eğitim Bakanlığı for kindergarteners and maybe NCTM also, and they might want to use these for the dissemination part.
Yeah, no, we're gonna do that. I mean, we're gonna go for the schools, but we want first to do a pilot, and then we want to just like do the dissemination with that one. Also, we are disseminating, I guess, bilimsever çocuklar. This is another environment. I guess it was Koç University supporting this site. If you have any research that you could just like share your research within this website, and they disseminate your research with different ages, and then you can collect some attendees, because we're going to do an online environment. So this is a Turkish one that you could just like share your research with parents. We need parents, for example, for this one. So I like, if you have any idea to do some research online, Open Lab Online is a good venue to create things, and Lab.js is another free environment, so you create your own tools. That they have some videos to share that. If anyone needs a further advice on these tools, I can always help, like when I am done.
Okay, I think I'm looking up to see whether there are any other contributions, but
Just an informal question. Again, the last one, sir's promise. All right. Did you do these tests with your little one, Serkan?
With my kids?
Yes.
Yes, they were my pilot, the first piloters.
Yeah, then you became like Piaget, huh?
Yes.
How
I
are they?
design and then I test on them and then we go to the other kids to test.
Okay.
It's-
I have a question, actually, a more formal question.
okay.
Slightly more formal, on the more formal end. Did you have difficulties in finding participants? I wondered why the numbers were far below what I would expect for trying to validate a measurement tool. I wondered whether you had real difficulties, especially in the pandemic era.
No, it's not. It's not because we have difficulty to find the participants, but we limited the numbers about 80 to 90 because this was a pilot. So this was the first pilot of the online. So we didn't go further than just like 80 to 90 participants, and to make some decision on the revision. So we're gonna have like wider distribution, but this is the first pilots. That's the reason we kept the resources limited. So that's, I mean, why we did that.
Okay. I missed that detail. I thought that
I didn't say that. So thanks for asking, but I didn't say that. But that was the reason that we keep it. We said it was enough for 80, and then like if somehow the data wouldn't be useful, so let's go about like somewhat a little bit higher than 80, and then we get some 90. I guess if I'm not wrong, 90 parents. And also this wasn't like in the we were doing this one-to-one, so it was taking a lot of time to do 90 people. It's about like 90 hours in total that you're spending.
it's true.
Because they are kids.
Yeah, with kids.
Okay, so that's the final call, a final invitation for any remarks you might have to Serkan Hoca. If not, I think I'll close this session, our first talk. Thank you, Serkan, very much.
Thank you for your questions. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
And thank you all for coming. We'll be meeting. Duygu, when was the next one?
On December 10th.
December 10th. We'll have a surprise session on the Teachers' Day that week. We don't have a pilot fantasy, but we'll have something being prepared for that particular Friday. But the next one will be in December, next academic seminar. Thank you all for today. See you later.